Hey everybody, Stan Efferding here with Rhino's Rants. Be sure to hit subscribe for upcoming content and tune in to thecooler.com to get the world's only cooler within a cooler. Holds your pre-workout, a gallon of ice water, and your post-workout shake. Thanks for tuning in. Hey everybody, Rhino here, the world's strongest pro bodybuilder and inventor of the cooler. The world's only cooler. Keeps your pre, intra, and post-workout drinks all together inside one ice-cold container. I took the cooler to the park the other day with drinks for my kids, and I wanted everyone to see that it's so easy, even a 2-year-old can use it. I want to take a moment to thank everyone for listening to my rants and giving me so much great feedback. I've literally received hundreds of emails, messages, and comments over the last few weeks, and I hate that I'm so damn busy all the time that I can't answer all of them, but I do read them. I've responded to as many as I can, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, and my condolences to the family of the guy who listened to my obesity rant and commented that he killed himself at the 2-minute mark. Apparently not a fan. I said in my first rant that there are many paths to the same destination, and I can only share with you my path, my advice from my experience. And what you do with that advice is really up to you. So when people email me and ask me about their kids, young athletes who are struggling to gain weight, and how they should eat to get bigger and improve performance, I share my opinion from my experience. And here it is. When I was 12 years old, I worked at 7-Eleven. When school got out, I'd walk to work, and my lunch would consist of a hot dog and a soda. And during the shift when I got hungry, I'd drink more sodas and Slurpees and snack on nachos with some of that runny imitation cheese-looking substance that was pumped out of a can. I kept very busy mopping floors, stocking coolers and shelves, and I'd often work until 11 o'clock or midnight and then walk home. I remember watching Welcome Back, Kotter with my mom just before I went to bed, so oftentimes I wouldn't get to sleep till 1 o'clock in the morning. And at 6:30 a.m., my alarm would go off, start the next school day, and I'd do it all over again. I ran hard from sunup to sundown, and that's the way I liked it. I begged for that job. I made $2 an hour, but at 12 years old, I was living large. When I was 14, my mom got a job managing a bakery, so after school I'd walk to the bakery and I'd work there. Of course, lunch and dinner consisted of a maple bar or two and some more soda. It was no easy job. I had large metal baking trays that were stacked taller than me, and they had to be scrubbed with steel wool and water so hot that my hands would turn numb. The wood tables and floors had to be scraped with a metal blade. All the sugar and flour was dried like concrete. And during soccer season and wrestling season, I'd go to practice, and then I'd go to work, and I'd eat another donut or two, and I'd wash that down with another soda. The point is, I worked hard, and I ate like shit. In my parents' defense, we didn't have any of that crap at home. No sodas or chips or candy, but I wasn't eating at home most of the time. You have to remember, this was 1979, and there simply wasn't the same degree of awareness about nutrition. And skim milk, margarine, cereal, and frozen pot pies were considered healthy foods at the time. Needless to say, I was scrawny. I wrestled 98 pounds as a freshman and sophomore in high school. I was 106 pounds as a junior and 110 pounds as a senior. My brother and his friends nicknamed me Runt, and my soccer coach gave me the Chicken Legs Award in high school. I can remember in PE class, looking down, I was the only boy who didn't have any hair on his legs. It's ironic because I remember wanting to have hair so bad on my legs, and I've spent the last 30 years trying to get rid of it. And during my senior year of high school, my grandmother passed away back in Pennsylvania, and my grandfather needed help taking care of his place and running errands. So I drove back to Pennsylvania, and I lived with my grandfather. This is a tiny little farm town about 2 hours outside of Pittsburgh. And I enrolled to finish high school in Patton, Pennsylvania, where I think our graduating class was about 30 kids. My uncle lived on a farm nearby, and I'd spend evenings and weekends helping him on his farm, taking hay to the horses and cows, planting potatoes and corn, and raising chickens and harvesting crops. The main thing that changed was my diet and my sleeping habits. On the farm, we ate eggs and bacon, cooked in lard. There was a dairy farm nearby where we'd get our raw milk straight from the cow in a glass bottle with a thick cream that was separated on the top. You'd have to shake the milk real well before you drank it. We'd get steaks, pork, and ground beef from another farm that raised cattle and pigs. and every meal would consist of some type of meat and plenty of carbs, such as potatoes and rice and pasta, or all you could eat warm homemade bread with real butter. We worked hard every evening and all weekend long, but I packed sandwiches to eat while I was plowing fields, and when the sun went down at night, we slept early. It's not hard to predict what happened when I started sleeping well and eating all those nutrient-dense foods. High quality, cholesterol-based animal proteins loaded with iron, creatine, and B vitamins. I started to grow. I finally went through puberty at age 17. I went from 110 pounds to 140 pounds in less than 6 months while I was working on the farm. It might be easy just to dismiss that as a biological clock, but I think it'd be very short-sighted not to recognize which comes first, the chicken or the egg. In my case, it's clear that the terrible diet and the excessive activity level and lack of sleep caused delayed onset puberty. My brother, who's 2 years older than me, was 6'1", 200 pounds when he was 15. Man, he used to kick my scrawny ass. But I earned every one of those beatings running my mouth. Now, a similar problem can occur with female track athletes whose body fat gets so low they suffer from amenorrhea, which is a delay or cessation of the menstrual period due to hormonal changes brought about by too much calorie restriction and excessive exercise. Much the same way a prepubescent male who doesn't have adequate nutrition and sleep will impede the hormonal changes necessary to begin puberty. There's certainly other causes, such as genetics and hormonal maladies, but in my case, I'm speaking about those controllable factors, such as nutrition and sleep. In my rant on obesity, I said the most important thing was to create and maintain a calorie deficit. With respect to young athletes trying to gain weight, the most important thing is to create a calorie surplus. Now, this can be done through a combination of increased calorie consumption and decreased total caloric expenditure. I found in my case that I was so active it was very difficult to eat enough to fuel my workload. Now, in the powerlifting business, it's often said when you're trying to gain weight, don't run if you can walk, don't stand if you can sit, and don't stay awake if you can sleep. Sometimes it's necessary, particularly for ectomorphs, to cut back on total workload so they can recover and grow from training. And while I believe it's important to get plenty of nutrient-dense foods, I understand that's not always possible, and at the risk of missing a meal, I've said I prefer to see an athlete eat something instead of nothing. And that's where PB&J sandwiches and shakes may play a role. But I prefer the big basics, such as red meats, eggs, whole milk, and plenty of calories to allow them to grow. Look at those farm boys playing offensive line for Kentucky, Ohio State, and Tennessee. They're not drinking protein shakes. These kids are growing up on real farm food. These kids eat plenty of cholesterol-based animal fats and proteins. Now, if you're like a lot of parents, you cringe when I say the word cholesterol. It still, to this day, has such a negative connotation due to Ansel Keys' bogus, discredited research associating it with cardiovascular disease. I used to coach high school soccer, and I've trained high school, collegiate, and professional athletes for 25 years. Over that time, I've had the opportunity to see the nutritional environment change drastically. When I used to recommend red meat, eggs, and dairy to young athletes, oftentimes parents would be reluctant to feed their kids this food. They were afraid of cholesterol and fats. They thought it was bad for them. But the fact is, those are the first foods I recommend for young athletes. Cholesterol is hugely important. It's what's responsible for manufacturing testosterone in the body. That's why I prefer cholesterol-based animal fats as the primary source of proteins and fats, as opposed to processed vegetable fats and nut butters. Animal fats are great for athletes. And while the paragons of health continue to whine about milk, I just refer them to Rich Froning, 4-time Reebok national champion, the world's fittest man. He drinks a gallon of whole milk a day. The bad fats are the processed vegetable oils, such as soy, peanut, corn, safflower, sunflower, and canola oil. The ones that have been refined, they tend to be high in omega-6s, and they're highly susceptible to oxidation during processing, which makes them react and are damaging to the body. I'd never replace animal fats with any of these oils. I hate demonizing foods, but I think these oils are poison. The sad fact is that they're in everything. Mayonnaise is one of the worst. The first ingredient's canola oil.
Deep fried foods are equally as horrible. Even foods cooked in restaurants are most often cooked in canola oil. I can't eat eggs or steak or chicken basted in canola oil because it causes me horrible digestion problems. Of course, cold-pressed oils like coconut oil and extra virgin olive oil are much better. But at the risk of ruffling too many feathers, I will say this. If you put a bowl of olives and a New York steak in front of me, I know which one I'm eating to grow muscle. Now, you'd think I'd learned something from this experience with my diet in Pennsylvania, but as it turns out, I wasn't finished making stupid nutrition mistakes. When I got to college, I was 140 pounds, and that's when I started weightlifting. I was lifting at the local box gym, and they didn't have the internet, so the only real resource of information was the guy behind the desk. Now, he was bigger than me, so of course, he knew more about training and nutrition, right? That's how it works, right? Now, he was getting ready for a bodybuilding show, and he was eating boneless, skinless chicken breast, tuna fish out of a can, and some rice cakes. So I started eating that. I also picked up Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia Bodybuilding and started lifting weights 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. Now, most of the time, we would train at 5 a.m. in the morning, and we'd go to school all day, and then after school and on the weekends, I'd work construction. Now, my energy expenditure was through the roof, and I was trying to fuel that with chicken breasts, egg whites, and broccoli. I used to think that you built muscle lifting weights, and I had no idea all you did was break down muscle in the gym. I thought that the bodybuilders ate foods like chicken and rice cakes were the right foods to build muscle. But it's extremely hard to build muscle on a calorie deficit. The same is true for young athletes. Very hard to recover and get stronger from hard training when you're in a calorie deficit. Now, this went on for nearly 3 years. I was incredibly disciplined and hardworking and very consistent. And after that 3 years, I entered my first bodybuilding show. I weighed just 158 pounds at the time, and I was in the lightweight novice class, and I took like 10th place. I'd only gained 18 pounds in 3 years. Now, these days, I can typically put 18 pounds of muscle on an athlete in 3 months. I see this all the time when I'm training men's physique athletes. They want to have an 8-pack all year round, so they don't eat enough food, and it slows their growth. They quickly reach plateaus with that kind of calorie restriction. Then they want to increase their training volume without increasing calories, thinking they can build muscle that way. The hardest thing to do is convince them that it's okay to have a 4-pack for a while, so they can put on some extra muscle. And then if they can maintain that new body weight and create a new set point for themselves, then their body will begin to harden at that new heavier weight. The constant process of gaining a little bit of weight and quickly dieting it off so you can have a photo shoot every weekend won't yield long-term results or muscular gain. Now, at my first show, I met the promoter, Mark Delp, who was also the owner of a hardcore gym in town called Delp's Gym. You know, the kind of place where all the dumbbells were on the floor and there was a sign on the wall that said, "Re-rack your weights." The drinking fountain was a spittoon for chewing tobacco, and you never dared use the bathroom. And all the members were either ex-cons or cops. Kind of reminds me of the time I spent training with Eddie Cohn at Quad's Gym in South Chicago. Now, Mark took some time to talk to me, and he told me I wasn't eating enough and I was training too much, period. He invited me out to his gym where he gave me some more information about how to improve my diet and how to get the most out of my training. And Mark was way ahead of his time. He knew more about nutrition and bodybuilding in 1988 than most trainers I meet today, almost 30 years later. He also had a huge influence on the success of IFBB pro Aaron Madron. Now, the advice was simple, and it still works today. Load up on those farm foods and train with the heavy basics. Done. Of course, when I watch trophy kids and I see parents talking about how they're feeding their kids supplements like creatine and glutamine, I just shake my head. If you follow any of my stuff, you already know what I think about all the pills, powders, and potions. Young athletes can get more than enough out of the food they eat. They just have to eat enough food. Now, here's what I meant when I titled this rant. Why your healthy diet may be stunting your kid's growth. When you have a 16-year-old boy doing 2-a-day football practices, it needs to be his job to stay ahead on those calories if he wants to be able to fuel that kind of workload. And if they're eating boneless, skinless chicken breasts and broccoli, it's going to be really hard to eat enough of those foods to repair and grow. I like more calorie-dense foods. So if you're going to eat chicken thigh, which has more fat, more cholesterol, and more calories overall. If you don't have a lactose intolerance or a whey allergy, then drink whole milk instead of skim milk for the same reason. More fats, more calories, and it's easier to get a lot of those calories in because you can just drink them. Now, I mentioned before, 4-time world's strongest man Andrius Pujanowski ate 10 eggs and half a pound of bacon for breakfast. I think the calories and the nutrient density of those foods are great for high-capacity young athletes who are burning a lot of calories training. Now, I hate seeing athletes switch from eggs to egg whites, or eat chicken breast and tilapia instead of top sirloin steak, or needlessly restrict carbohydrates. Their performance always suffers. I used to do the same thing when dieting for shows. When I trained with Flex Wheeler, he completely changed this for me, and he had me eating 8 times a day, over 4 pounds of steak, and 600 grams of carbs a day, while I was dieting for a show. I went from competing at 225 pounds in 2008 to competing at 255 pounds in 2009 on Flex's program. Now, I know these are very general suggestions, but I don't think it needs to be any more complicated than that. It's impossible to be specific without knowing the details of the individual, such as age or their workload, or what sports they're competing in, or maybe their body composition or food allergies. But the biggest challenge I find with young athletes is simply getting them to eat and sleep enough. So if you're trying to feed your 16-year-old athlete like a 60-year-old sedentary woman watching Dr. Oz, it's more than likely they'll underperform. If you're going to keep track of how many vegetables your young athlete eats, then you should also be keeping track of how much muscle-building, nutrient-dense foods they eat if you want them to grow. So basically, I've spent 10 minutes talking about what you can do for your young athlete in 10 seconds. Skip the Cheerios. Go ahead and feed them whole eggs and bacon for breakfast with toast. And don't forget the butter. Toss some peppers and veggies in, make an omelet if you want. Wash that down with a glass of whole milk. Pack them 2 lunches and have them eat the extra sandwich on the run. Go ahead and add a slice or 2 of Tillamook cheese to their sandwich. Put together some pot roast with potatoes or stew and some spaghetti and meatballs. And along with a couple bucks for some whole milk, as they can get at the cafeteria. Top that off with a banana or an orange. Make sure there's a quick meal in the fridge they can eat when they get home, like meatloaf or the leftovers from the chicken, spaghetti, or stew. And another glass of milk to wash that down. Dinner time's a good opportunity to grill a steak or a salmon and include some pasta or veggies, and then finish their day off with a snack before bed, such as a full-fat cottage cheese. Now, here's the last thing to remember. Nobody just wakes up one morning and suddenly discovers they've put on too much muscle or too much fat from their nutrition and training program. Oh my God, Stan told me to have my kid eat butter and whole milk, and he woke up looking like Professor Clump. It doesn't happen that way. There will be plenty of opportunity along the way to assess progress and make adjustments as necessary. Well, I hope that helps, because that's my rant. And as always, thanks for listening.
Hey, thanks again for listening. Hit subscribe for future rants and click the link in the description for more information, and check out thecooler.com.